sharing my screen. Can you see that? Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, looks good.
Cool. So today we're talking about ransomware. It should be fun. Maybe talk through some of our different experiences, as well as some of the things that we see, what it is, how people are deploying it. Fun topic. I'm here with Steve, CEO of Blumera. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, everybody.
And you have a pretty long background in security. I think you've been in security for like, I don't know, you're 20 years plus.
Yeah, plus, yeah, it's been a while. Seen a lot of changes in the industry, and of course, a lot has stayed the same. So
that is a good way to put it, right?
That'll probably come up today too. Yeah.
you think?
Yep.
All right.
The unwillingness to change
Uh-huh.
from a security perspective. So, and then Mike Behrman, our director of security, is on as well.
Howdy.
Thanks for joining. And yeah, I think a few fold. Both of you have a lot more extensive experience than myself in ransomware. My extent is typically getting on the back end of after it's deployed, helping someone get the controls in place to detect it, or controls in place previous to detect it before it happens, right? So we'll kind of hop in, and this is an open forum discussion. We do this quite often. For everybody on the call, thanks for joining, and we'll hop in here and talk ransomware. So, yeah, first off, thoughts like just in general from a ransomware perspective, right? I think it's top of mind for everyone. Is more or less my biggest observation, and so curious what your initial thoughts are just in general on what's going on with ransomware. And kind of where you've seen it come from and the impact it's had on the security industry.
Steve, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of notable things, I think, from an industry perspective. The first thing, obviously, that's different with ransomware is that for a long time in security, we were concerned with defending against people with actors with the intent to steal, right? And ransomware is significantly different in that it's an extortion scheme. Essentially, what the criminals that are running ransomware are trying to do is basically take a hostage and get you to pay a fee for it. That's important for a couple different reasons. One is, and the big one, the elephant in the room, is it changes who's a target, right? So now instead of me having to have valuable data that I can that a criminal can take to a market and sell, like credit card data, PHI, money, access, all those sorts of things. The target of the attack doesn't have to have anything that has inherent value or transferable value. They just need to have an operation or some data that they care about. So essentially, it's not whether my data is valuable to anyone else, it's whether my operation is important to me and my data is important to me. And that's what the criminals are focusing on. So huge change in terms of who's a target.
Yeah.
Has been created by this industry.
Yeah, the victimology piece, we could talk about all hour. You know what I mean? It's really interesting to see because just to add to your point, Steve, I think in the past, it's the advanced persistent threats that tend to make a lot of the headlines. They're going after state secrets or at least economic espionage, things like that. This particular threat, ransomware, is targeting very soft targets. You know what I mean? Just municipal governments, hospitals that maybe are undersecured. They're basically industry verticals that probably took security a little more lightly than these high visibility or companies holding really sensitive data. So it's the victimology piece is very interesting. The only other thing I'd add is that I think the evolution of ransomware is super fascinating as a criminal enterprise, both in some of the darknet black market cooperation between disparate ransomware gangs or malware developers. And then also just the nature, the concept of operations, the model of ransomware is changing over time just in the past 3 or 5 years. Really fascinating to watch, but there are interesting opportunities that arise with that too.
Yeah, I think that's
I think
important.
it's,
I'm sorry, Patrick.
sorry, go. I was going to say on the, as it relates to the origination, right? Like Bitcoin wasn't even in existence, right? I think 2010. And so I do think the concept of the development of cryptocurrencies, right, is a really interesting one in this regard. And sometimes it gets left out or forgotten about, right, is the fact that like this wasn't even really technically feasible to do extortion in the way that it's being done. And personally, my experience is like I was a pretty early adopter. I say pretty, like more or less like 2015, 2014 Bitcoin and whatnot. And one of the things I found fascinating was the fact that like the criminal enterprises were the ones that were first adopters. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times they actually build usable technology. It's kind of interesting, but like if only they applied their logic and their thoughts to like real business, in some cases, it could have a more positive impact maybe. But yeah, I just think it's interesting how like really it's only been the last couple of years where we've seen the persistence of ransomware arise, as now crypto is now available to almost anybody as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Where like in 2012, this wasn't really feasible because it wasn't easy to get Bitcoin. But now that it is, hey, go buy some Bitcoin, similar to like go buy some gift cards in a phishing campaign. And now I can actually extract money out of you, which gets really interesting.
I can buy Bitcoin at the corner gas station up the road, literally. The way I could draw $40 from an ATM. I thought that was interesting, you know? That tells you about the adoption.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Hey, and I'm kind of curious, have either of you heard of any ransomware techniques that are not leveraging cryptocurrency or Bitcoin?
In terms of the payment mechanism, yeah, not that I'm aware of, Mike.
Yeah. Not directly. You know, there was a time a few years ago where it was Bitcoin was not quite as accessible as it is to the average person. And so people didn't know where to buy it from and things like that. And that complicated things. But no, I mean, I think it's front and center as far as the extortion payments go.
Yep. Hey, so question, right? Like, and Steve, I'll throw this one to you. When we look at this, like, who's typically a top target for ransomware? Is there any specific target that you see from a organization perspective that it should be most concerned?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I'll go back to the premise here is that it's very horizontal, and it's a numbers game for these schemes usually. So the targets really aren't picked necessarily in the traditional manner where I'm thinking about who the org is or what they might have. A lot of these schemes are automated, and they're just sort of running through an automated attack sequence, and it's targeting, you know, IP address space or something like that. And it doesn't really matter if it works. It just matters if a certain percentage works, like spam or phishing. The people who should be worried, of course, are if you're susceptible. You know, there's a couple characteristics of ransomware, and I think you know, a couple you know, misconceptions I've heard in thinking about what ransomware is. It's not just encryption, right? It's compromise first, and then the hostage taking is usually characterized by you know, using encryption. But there are two things have to be true, right? Is you have to be able to be compromised, and you have to want to pay the ransom, right? So that means that they get a hold of something that you care about enough to pay up on, which is either they get a critical system, they get critical data, or you don't have a way to recover, and then of course the other one thing that we will focus on is how do we become less how do we avoid the risk of the compromise, and there's some tactics there that actually give the defenders an advantage, or at least if you understand how the sequences go.
How does it compare to from like I think there's a combination of technology, so like mobile versus server, laptop, workstation, right? Is one thing to consider, and then I think there's the aspect of like personal versus corporate would be maybe the other comparison. Curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll start with the personal versus corporate. I think generally the ransomware we started seeing more in the personal space, and it was whether it was your gaming rig or your family photos or just the machine that you had to work on, and characterized by relatively modest asks for payments. Right, and what that model proved out was that the sequence would work, and they could figure out, as you mentioned earlier, Patrick, the basic mechanics were worked out that way, and then they basically took it up market and went after businesses because they'll pay more, and per compromise, you're gonna see a lot more return if you hit an organization or a business than if you hit a person.
Yeah, a lot of those personal attacks resulted in personal negotiations, and a lot of these ransomware gangs were postured for those negotiations. You wonder if they reached a scaling problem though, and they couldn't negotiate with 1,000 people, so they they wanted to control costs on the resourcing side and maybe shrink that help desk team and just go after some big ones. And it's actually become a professional. The negotiation part has become a professional industry in and of itself, which is well, we won't make a character judgment about it. It's interesting.
I call it product marketing at its best, right? I mean, this is a funny thing, is criminal enterprises have the same functions as a normal business. Like, they're running marketing campaigns to try and get people to pay, extortion. Like, these are the same skills you would apply to a normal business. They're just done in a way that's illegal, essentially.
It goes even further than that, though,
creates harm.
You have these ransomware developers advertising their own ransomware as a service to other people that just kind of want to plug and play in that environment. And there's marketing involved in that too, right? You know what I mean? There are choices, there are economic choices that criminals need to make or have available to them to adopt these weapons. So it's not just the victims themselves; it's also other criminals themselves.
Yeah,
that's it.
Another one I point out is that they're often there's a high motivation to have the support and the belief that they'll actually turn over the keys if you give them money. So their support is actually in many cases, is actually quite professional and effective there, and they care about their reputation, and it's simply to drive the likelihood of payment.
Yeah. No, that's I mean, like, essentially getting in that behavior. Is there any cases where people are paying and the people don't give keys up?
There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. And there are definitely cases where you will get the keys, but the data is corrupted. So maybe everybody follows through with what they said, but something went wrong on the restoration side. That's been known to happen. But the whether to pay or not's a massively interesting topic too. I mean, it's easy to see it from both sides. at the same time, when you do pay out $6 million, $10 million, you are absolutely exacerbating the problem. At the same time, if you're a business owner, you want to turn the lights back on and get back to business. It's a real catch-22, but it's very precarious.
Yeah,
I think not only has it become a decision on that regard, but now the government's getting involved, right?
Yeah, they've taken
on
some
advice
steps.
of
Treasury.
what to do or what not to do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it just.
I think
Go
we
ahead.
can agree that it would be better for us collectively that nobody pays, right? And create the or lessen the incentive for this model to persist. However, there's also considerations, of course, within the organization, and unfortunately, at that point, you're a victim, and we, everyone's empathetic there.
100%.
But thinking through some of those things in advance is an important part of the preparation aspect to understand. Not trying to make these decisions in the heat of battle can be important, right? Is figure out what you want to do ahead of time, or what you're prepared to do, or getting yourself organized is just part of the sort of the disaster prep aspect of how to deal with this.
Maybe even having an advisor too. You know what I mean? Somebody you can talk to, bounce ideas off of. Hopefully, if that kind of capability isn't already in house.
Yeah, I think you almost nearly have to assume compromise, right, and work from there. It's like, hey, at some point we are going to get hit with a ransomware attack. If we start there, right, then you can come to those conclusions on what is to be done, and then what measures could be put in place to reduce that risk, if that's a way to think about it, right? And I think that's in general just about breaches in general, but I think ransomware is one that is particularly high impacting to a lot of organizations and businesses.
100%.
Yeah, it's both incident response and disaster recovery, business continuity preparation questions. The same questions you're going to ask about other scenarios is what if, how likely, and the more you can get in front of the thought process there, the less the better shape you'll be. And of course, we're going to talk about risk reduction, which everybody cares about, but it's not realistic to plan for perfect security, and you have to assume that there's some risk of this in some likelihood.
Yeah, 100%.
One other thing that no, I'm not going to go there. Sorry, I was thinking of some of the downstream impacts, but well, yeah, one thing that comes to mind is like a lot of times it's kind of shocking, right? But like someone has a ransomware attack, it has huge impacts in their business, and then like 6 months goes by and everything goes back to normal, and they almost forget about it. Which I think sometimes is human nature, right? But like that's I think one of the other things is like it seems like people have to like in some cases have to be hit like multiple times before they actually recognize and realize that this is a real issue. And I'm curious of the psychology on that, if you guys have any thoughts behind that as well, because I personally have seen that many times become the case.
I think larger enterprises, it's a complicated question. Certainly, you'd hope people learn the first time. That's certainly no guarantee. It really boils down to resources too, and what can be allocated to security and stuff like that. That's always a balancing act for any business. That goes without saying, but there's a lot that can go wrong, especially with the bigger enterprise. The bigger the enterprise is, the larger the attack surface and so forth, especially if they're not taking corrective measures in between the incidents themselves.
Yeah,
Cool.
I
Hey,
think
this next,
we do see that psychology over and over again with breach and near breach, whether it's ransomware or something else. And this is important for people on the security side that are communicating with upper management, is take advantage of the top of mind point in time when you have everyone's attention. That's the time when you go and make your case for what do we need to do to improve our security program, and assume that they will lose focus and lose motivation to keep paying attention to that. It's a bit of human nature there.
Yeah. Maximize
so from,
maximize the opportunity you have with that first negative event to get the message across, to run the calculations, to hopefully make the right investments, the careful investments, hopefully.
yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the most, like, from a latest trend perspective, right? Like how do you see ransomware getting deployed? What are some of the different tactics like that you see in this segment? The portion is brought to you by Diet Coke. The second portion of my lunch today. So
I think what I see a lot of that's interesting to me is classic intrusion behavior. And what I mean by that is there's been a bit of an evolution. We talked about how it used to be very, the victims were very personal in nature. Then they became kind of corporate. Things like WannaCry came out, and you saw ransomware actors adopt worm-like capabilities to facilitate lateral movement quickly. What I see now, or what I read about a lot now, is these very carefully crafted intrusions, the kind you would see anywhere, the kind you would see for that classic data exfiltration or something like that, espionage, being used on the ransomware side. So once they create that initial beachhead using the malspam or the open RDP service, then you see a human actor conducting an interactive operation to move laterally in the network, to pivot around, find the pain points in the network, directory access, Active Directory, maybe where sensitive file information is. Why that's interesting is it creates a couple of different opportunities. One, from a tempo perspective, from an operational pacing perspective, the defenders have an opportunity to intervene. But also, you see if these interactive operators are using classic intrusion behaviors, the kind you'd see in a penetration test. Those are things you can build your detections around, of course, and then you can practice those things during penetration tests, the way many organizations are hopefully doing already.
Yeah, the first thing
I do think.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
No, you're fine, Steve. Good.
Yeah, the first thing I'd repeat is that ransomware is sort of a model or a class of things, not and that the tactics will vary, and they'll evolve over time, and that's been the case. It'll continue to be the case. To pick up on what Mike was saying, those tactics are often borrowed from more sophisticated attacks, and they'll often lag what you see for more sophisticated attackers use, and then they get deployed in more of an automated fashion. But I think one of the interesting things, and as a defender, gives us sort of room to defend, is the use of multi-stage attacks, where there's a series of steps that have to happen before you get to the point where the encryption and the hostage taking has the big impact on the organization. As defenders, that's a huge window for us to interrupt the attack before something catastrophic happens. And that can be days or weeks, although we're seeing some also alarming trends that in some cases that those windows are shrinking as the attackers get better. Mike, you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some well-documented cases where people are getting domain admin credentials in under an hour from the moment of deployment all the way to that privilege escalation moment. You see entire ransomware encryption attacks occur end to end within 5 hours with Ryuk recently, which is really interesting. The attackers are getting better. They are getting smoother. But like Steve said, and this is really worth foot stomping, all of these methods borrowed from penetration testing or more advanced methods create opportunities for defenders to intervene or interrupt that cycle, right? And if there are all these stages in between the initial delivery of malware or mouse spam, or the attempt to access a exposed server over RDP to that point of encryption, the time and the stages themselves become very attractive opportunities for defenders to take action.
Yeah, and everything from the understanding your attack surface and limiting how, that sort of likelihood that an attack is going to land. That's your first level of defense there. As Mike said, your penetration testing activities, your vuln scanning activities, your understanding of your own security architecture, your testing of your defensive capabilities, these and an understanding of what is out there can help you inform and help reduce that first level of risk. And again, a lot of these, many of these are not specifically targeted at you. They're targeted at a herd. And if you're immune to that first level attack, they're going to go away. It's not like a persistent attack where someone is bent on getting, the Coke recipe or whatever your crown jewels are. So that's a benefit as well as a defender, rather.
You know what I would add to that, and Patrick, I think you and I have both seen this up close with some of our clients that we've talked to, is it's the network hygiene stuff. It's knowing what's normal. It's taking care of those irregular events that you see in the network. Maybe they're not necessarily malicious, they're just abnormal, but maybe they're overlooked because surfacing that information is complex and requires a SIM or something like that. But I love really good network hygiene. I really want, that creates a favorable set of conditions for the defender to recognize the abnormal, right? The more understood, the more conventional, the more appropriate all those network operations are, the more likely the abnormal one's going to stick out. And I think a defender needs every advantage it can get in that regard.
So RDP inbound is one example, right? That we, as in terms of what we do at Blue Miro, that we focus on as whether it's part of an attack or we just see it, is an important signal and of obviously a door open to attackers. Mike, how is that important, and what are some of the what's the tie-in to ransomware there?
Yeah. Believe it or not, one of the biggest initial attack vectors for ransomware actors is that exposed RDP service. People set up a DNS server that's also has the Active Directory server role. It tends to come with RDP exposed. But what they don't realize is that maybe that server is publicly accessible over that port now, right? They're not locking down the unnecessary services, and they're exposing this very, very sensitive device out there. It becomes extremely easy, trivial even, to conduct a full network exploitation from there. So it's on the defenders to actively monitor for those sensitive ports being exposed, to note the irregularities, inform the infrastructure teams to take action. But the continuous monitoring piece is huge in that regard. You want to know when that's happened. It's never too late, really, to begin to take action on that.
Yeah, I see same thing. It's kind of funny, but even deploying POCs, the conversations with customers around not realizing that they have RDP or SMB exposed is probably a top level thing that happens about 50% of the time. And so it's, just shockingly surprising. Like, and most of the time there's kind of combination of like, oh wait, I knew that was actually out there and forgot about it. Like from years ago, is one thing. Oh, someone misconfigured something, right?
Yeah.
Is another one. And then you have a suite of people which are like, no, we did that intentionally to make it easier for everyone, right? And they just don't even realize that how much of a risk they just exposed. And I've seen that within organizations and it's shocking, right? But it happens at organizations with high sophistication at times as well. It's not just the small companies, right? So I do think that sort of basic hygiene type of stuff is pretty important as it relates to the ransomware attacks. Hey, Ben, so Ben on chat asked a question. I think it's a good one. How often do you or your clients interact with their respective cybersecurity insurance carriers? Are they, as they are reacting from a ransomware incident? I would say, like, personally, from friends in the industry and myself, like, certainly insurance companies are becoming much more involved in making recommendations on best practices to put in place post-incident. They're also trying to figure out how to make sure companies they insure put those in place as well. And there's a real problem with the insurance companies, and they don't know how to actually insure for cybersecurity. That the whole industry is trying to figure out right now, I'd say in general, is at least my take. I don't know if anybody else has, if either you have any opinions on that as well.
No, I think it's worth foot stomping that the insurance carriers themselves, if companies choose to go that route, are becoming more explicit or opinionated about what kind of security controls they want to see in place to either float a policy or in response to one. And it's interesting. It's tracked. To me, there's some parallels with, standard compliance like PCI. That's kind of an evolving list of controls and security measures that are needed to be certified. It's following a similar model on the insurance side.
Yeah, the first thing I would recommend, and I'm not an insurance expert, but the first thing I would recommend is if you have cyber insurance to make sure you understand how it applies to breach situations and ransomware in particular, and if where the insurance company that you're working with will come into the process, right? Because we have seen, the need for coverage, while something is going on, the interaction with the insurance company that can inject delay and lack of clarity into the situation. And meanwhile, your operation is paralyzed, or the ransom is ticking up. So understanding what you need to do and what it covers, whether it's relevant or not for that ahead of time. Figure that out in peacetime, not while it's happening.
I do think that, and I don't know if we've seen this in the industry quite yet, but I do think similar to, like, you look at Tesla and what Elon Musk is doing with insurance on the Teslas, where I was reading the quarterly report where their expectation is they'll probably make more money off of insurance than they will selling cars, which is crazy, right? But what they know is they actually know when their car is being driven and being used, that the probability of something happening decreases significantly because of the safety controls in place, which means essentially you can end up insuring at a much lower cost and being profitable doing it. That is one thing I think of, and I don't think it's going to happen immediate, but yeah, the question is do security product companies get into this space and saying, hey, if we know with confidence you deploy our tool, will also secure your business, right? Because we know it reduces the probability of an incident or a breach.
It sounds like the safe driver discount they talk about the different insurance classic insurance carriers offer, right? If you invite access into how you drive your vehicle, whether you stay under the speed limit and so forth, and you provide that kind of clarity, yeah, they can insure you at a lower level. It's sort of a similar concept.
They increased my rate. I'm apparently not good at hard braking, I think is what they told me. And it was like, we're going to increase your rate by 10%. I was like, why did I do that? I think that was progressive. Discount double check, Ben says.
Yeah.
All right, enough about insurance. Yeah, I do think, and I can hop in a little bit and talk. Normally, we don't go into product demo, but I do think talking about some of these different things in context of like how Blue Mirror helps is interesting. And then the other thing, Mike, is you always talk about living off the land tactics.
Yeah.
And I think first off, like that's a newer term, not coming from security operations for me at least, and probably for a lot of people. I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here when it relates to ransomware.
Yes.
And getting a foothold and deployed. I'm curious to hear your perspective on what that means and how that applies here.
If you look at a lot of these intrusion-centric ransomware schemes nowadays, like Ryuk and so forth, multi-stage attacks, what these attackers are doing, it's not just zero-day exploits being used to create access or move laterally in the network. It's living off the land. And what that really means is a number of different things. It means things like repurposing or abusing certain existing binaries that are designed for either remote administration or the like. It means also, harvesting credentials, things like that, things that don't necessarily involve that unique exploitation or vulnerability exploitation to take place. And really that is the crux of the penetration testing industry right now. That's the crux, coincidentally, of the ransomware one as well. And it goes for APT as well in many, many cases. There are unique qualities, the APT and things like that, don't get me wrong. But over and over again, attackers don't need to necessarily come up with that brand new exploit to achieve whatever their goals are. Making full use of credentials that might be in memory, or that can be a password that can be guessed because of its predictability or limited length. All those things are the real kinds of attacks that people see day in and day out. And that narrative that the security industry used to hyper focus on related to 0-day this and that, while important, doesn't tell the whole story. It's really rounded out in many ways by these living off the land techniques.
Sweet. Hey, on the note of what you said, like I kind of show this, like we published some detection tests, which are, some are just very basic, but I think as it relates to this, the living off the land, it's like a pen test, right? Like people do it annually. Maybe some people do it sooner than that, and some people don't do it at all, right? But consistently they come back pretty red, and it's like, oh, it's red, we'll change some stuff by next year. And normally they don't do anything until a month before the pen test, a year later. Seems like pretty common practice. I don't know if that's what you guys have experienced as well,
yeah,
but it's kind of like, oh, we need to fix this, but we got a year until we really have to do it to prove that we've made progress, right? And I think that's an example, and I think kind of same thing, which is like we have a few tests here to show like if you can't detect even basic things, right, what good is it going to do you from a security perspective, and you're kind of leaving yourself wide open. Is my perspective, right? I'm not saying that these are necessarily perfect tests, but it's a start, and we'll have some more from a product perspective. And then the other thing I wanted to just show and hop in here is like similar to what you're talking about, right? Is like being able to detect, right? Hey, there's an RDP connection going to a public IP address or from a public IP address, right? that's in an early stage life cycle of like, you have risk and exposure, even if that isn't an attacker, right?
Yeah.
Just in the fact that it's exposed is a pretty big deal. And then we can kind of walk down through some of the other things we talked about as well. But yeah, I think you were highlighting the RDP problem or SMB connection problem of Windows servers on the internet.
I mean, Patrick, how many times have we been on calls with really diligent, very intelligent, even IT teams? They don't know what ports are exposed on certain devices on those sensitive ports. It's eye-opening. It's the kind of thing that can happen to anybody, especially in a larger enterprise where there's more complexity.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, and then if we go, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, the complexity and the misconfiguration, the unintended consequences, all those things, we're all working to manage those things. But the moment you see that information bubbled up, and to your point, Patrick, those are things that need to be closed up as quickly as possible, because that exposure, the downstream consequences can be, okay, now we've got Ryuk in our environment, and we're looking at a ransomware attack that's going to be a six-figure hit and a multi-day outage from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, and that's real risk reduction too, I might add, just to throw another useful buzzword that we've circled around a couple of times. When you're able to make tangible changes to your security architecture, your network architecture to better protect the environment, you are doing real, no kidding risk reduction.
Yeah, agree. I mean, agree 100% when you get that low-hanging fruit taken care of. I mean, going up stack a little bit, I think like two other things like reconnaissance scanning, that's a really early stage, like early in life cycle from an attack perspective is like, first off, hey, what ports do you even have open, right? What things could I even look at that might be vulnerable to go run an exploit on? Which is a common place of kind of getting into an environment or getting visibility of how to get in and plan that out. And I think this, if you look at it, it's like, well, yeah, that's what a lot of attackers are doing is they're just essentially going and scanning and building recon to know what to go attack next in that high volume instance. So like if you are open, the likelihood just increases that they're going to try and run some sort of attack on you.
Yeah, there's a reconnaissance event that precedes any of those RDP-based ransomware attacks. It wasn't just spontaneous. Somebody scanned for that port and enumerated what services or ports were available in advance.
And I'll just the other thing that we're doing there is by automatically blocking on that early stage attack. You're essentially denying the visibility that this automated attack sequence needs to even get started. So that's the herd part of it, right? Is they're going after numbers. You're not on the next stage list. You've probably just avoided that attack just simply by thwarting that initial stage. And you can't respond manually to every vulnerabilities, at every reconnaissance scan, or you'd be playing whack-a-mole 24/7. That's where automation is important to sort of flip the script there.
Yeah.
No, that's I think that's fair. And then the other aspect is identity, right? And I think like VPN connection is a good thing where it's like users are the other high value target, right? Where password spraying and I think controls here as well are particularly important, like two-factor, where you're essentially mitigating the risk of a user compromise as well. So I think like kind of two different angles, which is host compromise and then user compromise as far as different ways to get into the environment that end up leading to that ransomware attack. that can be relatively easily detected, right? If you have the right systems and controls in place. The challenge with most products is getting there is a very difficult feat, whereas the proposition around Blue Mirror and what we do is we can do this in a matter of a couple of hours, essentially, right?
Right.
All right, enough talking about products. Yeah, I'm seeing if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them as well. From a hardening perspective, right, is there any other things that you would suggest as far as best practices beyond some of the controls we have in place and detection capabilities as it relates to ransomware?
I still look at simple things like two-factor authentication, especially for your perimeter remote access. It's not that that's an infallible solution either, but it makes it dang hard. Like Steve has mentioned, the more complications you can introduce into that attack sequence, the more likely the attacker is to lose interest in you. So 2FA stands out to me, and in my experience, it has not been as widely adopted as it should, and it also has a lot of positive implications for internal access too, for nodes within the network.
Steve, anything that comes to your mind?
Well, it's a number of things, right? From a hardening perspective, I don't know if we've talked as much about lateral movement, but spreading once you get inside the environment, there are a number of tactics there, from segmentation with real controls to the ability to detect lateral movement with things like honeypots are useful because sure, you don't want to give up a foothold in your network, but you sure as heck would rather recover from one compromised endpoint. That might be a bad day for the IT team, but it's not the same as taking the operation out. So having visibility and the ability to make it easy to move laterally within the organization is important for a number of different reasons.
Yep. Ben mentioned on the call backups are important to make your hostage scenario not as sentimental. I think it's really interesting. Like, if anybody knows the code 42, I mean, they're essentially a backup product that has their strongest value proposition that they're pushing is related to security. More than ransomware, right? Like, I think data loss prevention as well. But yeah, that is certainly something that comes to mind, is like, it gets into disaster recovery, right?
Yeah.
Scenario where like ransomware can end up being just as bad as getting hit by the hurricane, right?
Yeah.
Or a natural disaster, right? Maybe you still have infrastructure, but like, if you don't have any of the software or the code that needs to run on it, it really doesn't matter.
I would add to it too, getting familiar, getting practiced with that restoration process is important too. Having the solution's great. It makes for a great line item on your budget. That's certainly the first step as well. But understanding how that restoration process works, how that special software, that backup works, its practicalities, the steps, it's worth drilling actually too. It's one of the things that gets very, very easily overlooked. But you want to make sure your business knows how to do that, not just has the technology on hand to do it.
Yeah, good point, Mike. And that goes across the spectrum from a resilience perspective. But it's a good point that Ben made, is the hostage that we're taking here is, it's not people. So one way to avoid the need to pay up really is to not care, right? Is to be able to recover, replace, sacrifice, all of those things, and you avoid that situation. So I often look at it as it's the Ransomware Act really is equivalent to putting your boot on your car, right? The car doesn't move; it's still where it is. You just can't use it. If you don't care about the car, you just keep walking, right? And that's what your recoverability, your resilience factor gives you, is like, okay, well, we've got a different way to deal with that. We're just going to ignore, we got a copy of the car somewhere. I think Tesla's coming out with that, right? They give you a copy if you give you another one if yours crashes. Is that what you're talking about, Patrick, with the insurance?
Yeah, I don't know what replacement is on it, on the insurance side, but yeah, it is kind of interesting. Like even the traditional insurance companies struggle with Teslas because like it requires you basically to go do a Tesla certified place mechanic, and normally that's Tesla, right? And so you don't have this option of sourcing out to 20 different repair shops, right? I mean, like essentially they have kind of locked down on the end to end to be able to do that really effectively, which is funny. I kind of laughed, and I know this is off subject, but like the Hummer that was launched by GM, I just kind of laughed because number one, the like price is astronomical for that thing. It looks like it's Avalanche, and they sold out, and I'm kind of laughing because it's like, I don't think this is going to be anywhere near what Tesla already has with some of the vehicles coming out. And so there is so much competitive differentiation when like you build and own from the ground up full stack. That gets interesting. So sorry for anybody that loves the new Hummer. I think they tried to replicate some of Tesla's excitement and vibe. And they did successfully on the marketing side, but I'm curious to see if it actually delivers as well. So tying that back to ransomware, oh man, can you imagine when our cars start getting hit with ransomware? Like, hey, you can't drive, put in your Bitcoin keys. Like that's, that's.
Elon had his own ransomware scare a couple months ago. There was a close access operation. It was one of the most interesting things to happen in cybersecurity in years, in my opinion. You had a Russian, Eastern European gang send somebody to Las Vegas who happened to be a Russian national working there at the facility that was going to kick off the initial access and execution for the ransomware. I mean, that's exciting stuff, man. That takes me back. I'll say that. I won't elaborate much more, but that's exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it starts to feel like war games, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, this stuff is real, and I think we haven't experienced. Like, I don't hope to experience any of that, right? But it's like, I think we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I think the ramifications in cybersecurity of some of these different tactics are real. So, hey, well, thanks. I'm gonna wrap it up. And it's top of the hour. Thanks everybody for joining. Do want to mention, and I talked about products, so I'm not going to go over my normal quick pitch on Blue Mira, but if you want to see more on Blue Mira, hit us up. We're happy to give a demo and talk more. And then next week, we have the Security Advisor Series with Bo Bullock and Amanda Berlin talking about cloud detection. So it should be a lot of fun. Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Matt and Mike, as this has been a lot of fun talking about ransomware.
Have a good one. Thanks.
Any last comments? I drank too much Diet Coke. That's all I got to say. That's why I'm jumping around. Got it on record now. Thanks so much. Take care, guys.
Have a good one.